Never pitched yourself for a visibility opportunity? Then tune into this episode of Go Pitch Yourself, where I share 5 reasons that podcast interviews are the place you should start. Hey there, pitches. Welcome to the Go Pitch Yourself podcast with me, Angie Trueblood, a self-proclaimed podcast junkie. I'm on a mission to rid the world of the crappy pitches that are filling up inboxes everywhere. Want to help? Then let's get pitching. Hey friends, thanks for tuning in to another episode of the show. So today I'm going to be sharing a bit about why I have niched into podcast pitching as my primary visibility platform, both for my clients and myself. As you'll see over the course of the podcast, I'll be bringing in experts on various episodes who pitch for lots of different types of outlets. They might help their clients gain visibility by guest posting on blogs. They might help their clients secure speaking opportunities. But I did think I should be really honest with you from the get-go about why podcasts are my preferred form of earned media, especially for folks who are just starting to leverage their expertise for visibility opportunities. So there's a couple of reasons. The first is actually podcast interviews are a great way to flesh out some of your core messages. So when you first start taking what you're an expert at and translating that into topics that you can speak about, sometimes it's a real challenge, especially for service providers who are so used to doing the work that they do. It is often hard to know exactly what your audience is interested in hearing about. And so when you're on an interview, the focus is not just on you. It's a conversation between you and the podcast host. And often that podcast host knows their audience really well, so they're able to ask really relevant questions. And it's almost a great training activity for you as the expert to start to get an idea of what parts of your expertise people really want to hear about. So I love that it's very different than if you secured maybe a speaking opportunity at a conference, and maybe you were leading just a breakout workshop session. Well, that still often has anywhere from 25 to 30 attendees in the room, and all eyes end up being on you. But in a podcast interview, again, it's that conversation. So the pressure is not there for you to be performing. It's really for you to be able to pull out what you're already an expert at and have that in a conversation form. Secondly, podcast interviews are often the gateway drug to other opportunities between you and the podcast host. So if you think about it, that interview, it's really just the first time in a lot of cases that you and that host have met. So it ends up being more of a starting point to perhaps a really amazing business relationship. Now, that relationship could end up adapting into a friendship, or there could be actual business outcomes that come from that relationship. So let's say you've pitched yourself to a podcast host who also has a membership platform for his or her audience. Well, they might be looking for expert speakers to come into their paid community and speak on a specific topic. And this is something that I've helped my clients secure as a result of meeting that podcast host for the initial interview. After that relationship gets warmed up, then they get invited in for more opportunities because that know, like, and trust factor has been prevalent through the conversation that they've had. I've had a client who I pitched for a podcast interview that was then subsequently invited to participate in an online summit and submit a guest post for the podcast blog. So there's lots of opportunities besides just that one-off interview that can come. The interview is really just the tipping point of that relationship, and then you and the host get to create whatever sort of opportunities you might want to pursue afterwards. The third reason I love podcast interviews so much is that honestly, the impact to your business can be almost immediate because that audience gets to hear you. So they already start to know and understand who you are faster than if they were reading a post by you or even following you on social media. So, a great example of this is I have a friend, Rachel Cook. She's also my coach. She interviewed me for a podcast, Promote Yourself to CEO. And our interview actually published on August 29th. Interestingly enough, because as we were talking and at the end of the interview, she asked where people could find me, and I had some really clear call to actions at the end of the interview. I had someone who heard the interview schedule a discovery call with me the following day. So the podcast was out 24 hours, and I had someone on my calendar in the coming weeks who was interested in working with me. Since then, she and I have connected, and we have decided that we are a good fit in working together. Honestly, that timeline is less than a month between the time Rachel and I recorded the episode and when I am starting to work with the client. And this isn't uncommon. It is because the podcast interview itself is not only a conversation where the audience can get to know you, but that host is an influencer to their community, to their podcast audience. And by them bringing you on the show, they're basically giving their okay, their approval, they're vetting you, saying, yes, this person is an expert. You should trust her. And they're giving you that go ahead. So the opportunity for the folks in the audience to have to really dig into your background and learn more about you. Yeah, that definitely happens, but it's different because you're not coming in as a cold, random expert. You're coming in as someone that podcast host, if they've really created an engaging show, and if their listeners really trust them, they're bringing you in as an expert that's often already very well vetted for that audience. So I love the fact that with podcast interviews, the impact to your business can almost be immediate, which is incredible. The fourth reason I love podcast interviews is because there is such power in the longevity of podcast episodes. So think about it. When is the last time that you binge read someone's blog or even a really rock solid online publication like Entrepreneur or Forbes? I mean, how many times have you seen an article that was published to one of those places and then chosen to go back and read more and more articles on the same topic? It often just doesn't happen because that connection between the audience and the actual influencer isn't as personal in some of these other platforms. Couple that lack of personality or that lack of personalization with the platform of podcasts. Take Apple Podcasts and the app that you see if you have an iPhone, for instance. You can easily scan the most recent 20, 30, 40 episodes that podcast host has published. So let's say someone finds a podcast for the first time. They listen to the episode that maybe was promoted to them on social media, and then they think, I really like that host. I really like their approach to this topic. Let me go listen to a couple of other episodes. That doesn't tend to happen in other medium the way that it does with podcasts. So I love the idea that podcasts are gaining new listeners every single day. And with each of those new listeners comes the opportunity for them to scan the episode titles and end up listening to the episode that you were featured on and falling in love with you. So my previous business several years ago was one where I helped busy moms learn to meal plan. And I pitched myself for a variety of visibility opportunities. And I would always drive people to a Facebook community that I had created. One of the questions that I asked to those people that were coming in new to that community was, how did you find me? And this was actually one of the tipping points for me to recognize that this podcast pitching was no joke. I kept seeing months and months after a particular interview episode went live that people were still being driven to my Facebook community from this one podcast. And that is not abnormal. That is very common if you're able to get on a podcast whose audience is well engaged and who is actively growing their listenership. So the longevity of podcast episodes is a huge boost to business and one reason that I like it so much. Finally, it's actually not terribly difficult to land an interview for a podcast. Whereas with some other visibility opportunities, it's more relationship focused. You might need to know how to pitch particular editors. If you're looking at online publications, often there are particular verticals and you need to connect with someone specific. That's really just not the case with podcast. Yes, as you get into podcasts whose audiences are larger, the relationship is far more important. But because podcasts are such a growing outlet and there are new podcasts being released every single day on Apple Podcasts and Stitcher and Spotify, there really is an endless number of podcasts that you could be searching for and ultimately be a good fit for. The only things that you really need to get a yes are a pitch that is relevant, that sounds like a human actually wrote it. And then you just need to make sure that you're sending it to the host of a show whose audience is similar to the audience that you serve. So much of being accepted as a podcast guest is making sure that you are putting the time and effort into making a pitch that really is personal, that really does acknowledge that you understand who that host is speaking to, and that you value the community that they have created enough to deliver high value to them. So I love that almost anyone can go out, create a really well thought out pitch, and get a yes on a podcast. It may not be Amy Porterfield, it may not be Pat Flynn, but you'll be able to go out and get featured on a relevant podcast without having to learn a whole new medium and a whole new set of marketing strategies. So really, those are the 5 reasons that I think and know that podcast interviews are one of the best places to start out when you're looking for earned media opportunities. So if you've never really considered pitching yourself for a podcast, or you've never really sat down and started planning out the different ways that you can make that happen, I encourage you to do that. So if you feel like the one thing that's holding you back from putting yourself out there and starting to pitch yourself for podcast interviews is just not knowing the next best step, I highly encourage you to hop over to my website, angietrueblood.com, and on the top menu bar, you'll see free visibility workflow. Go ahead and click on that and sign up to get my free Trello board that I actually use when I pitch all of my clients. And it also comes with a training, so it will walk you through the steps necessary of really putting yourself out there and sharing your message with more audiences of your ideal client. So once you go over there and do that, I would love to hear back from you. What do you think about pitching yourself for podcast interviews? Are there any questions that you're just dying to know before you take the first step? Make sure that you go ahead and share that in our free Facebook community, Go Pitch Yourself. I can't wait to hear from you. Alrighty, pitches. Thank you for listening to the podcast. Now it's time for you to get out there and go pitch yourself. Want a team of cheerleaders rooting you on while you do? Then pop on over and join our free Facebook community, Go Pitch Yourself. It's full of entrepreneurs just like you who are stepping up, being seen, and supporting each other along the way. Don't forget to head on over to the website for show notes, downloads, and links to any resources we mentioned in this episode. The website is angietrueblood.com/podcast. Happy pitching!